thank the representative of China for his statement, and I give the floor now to the representative of the Russian Federation.
President, we've listened very closely to the briefings from the USG's Rosemary DiCarlo and Mark Lowcock. However, we'd like to thank you, actually, and the humanitarian troika for having called this Security Council meeting on the situation in the northwest of the Syrian Arab Republic. I'll be quite open and sincere. We ourselves planned to organise such a meeting because the conversation on the development of the situation in Syria, including the Idlib zone of escalation, has made it high time for such a conversation. Some of our partners continue to send signals to the international community that have nothing to do with the real situation in Syria, or they distort the situation on the ground. We are quite bewildered by the fact that when there are illegal strengths, illegal from the Western countries in Syrian territory that cleaned out Baghouz or Hajin, where there was a loss of civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and schools, and where civilians died, nobody at any time proposed that we discuss the situation in those population centres. Can it really be that Syrian civilians in Idlib and Deir ez-Zor are different from each other? Why is it that the dead of Hajin were not considered worthy of discussion in the Council? Why, when we compare when Raqqa and other towns beyond the Euphrates were razed to the ground, why did nobody, including the humanitarian component in the United Nations, even mention those hospitals and schools? And nobody asked such detailed questions, inquisitive questions, as we've heard today. We think that the issue is not that it's a humanitarian catastrophe, which, as was said, inevitably must come after the beginning of a large-scale military confrontation in the Idlib zone of de-escalation. We've heard time and again the same about pacification of other areas of Syria. And it's clear that the issue is the desire to keep the territories that aren't under Damascus's control for as long as possible, regardless of who prevails in them. It might as well be the terrorists from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, who are actively mimicking and using political force, or pretending to be a political force. Unfortunately, despite the public statements, the anti-regime influence hasn't disappeared, nor has disappeared the aim for regime change in Damascus. Today we've heard words suggesting that there's a need to re-establish the ceasefire and to confirm commitment to the Sochi Memorandum of the 17th of September 2018. I emphasize that the memorandum is being fully implemented. All military activities are dictated exclusively by the need to correspond to provocation from terrorists. I once again recall the Russian-Turkish memorandum doesn't ban, but rather encourages the fight against terrorism. The Syrian government has time and again stated that there would be pauses in military activity, which were then undermined by the terrorists in premeditated fashion. On the 12th of June, we and our Turkish colleagues agreed measures to spread the ceasefire regime across the whole of the de-escalation zone. However, that time as well, terrorists from HTS, who control 99% of the Idlib territory, continued to bombard Syrian territory. Since the beginning of May, the fighters from HTS are continuing to attack the Syrian government forces, the Russian airbase at Khmeimim, towns and villages that are on the borders of the de-escalation zone. They're also using multiple launch rocket systems, mortars and combat drones. In the last few days, 12 population centres in Latakia and Hama have been bombarded. On the 6th of June, jihadists made a rocket attack against a hospital in Mkhard. Serious damage was also caused to the operation theatres, to the emergency rooms and to the inpatient centre. On the 16th of June in the same town, as a result of a rocket attack, some people were injured and serious damage was done to civic infrastructure. Yesterday, the fighters carried out a mortar bombardment on the village Kudikhi in the Aleppo province. There, 11 people died and 15 civilians were injured. Casualties included children. Today, Mark Lowcock mentioned this incident in this episode, but somehow he forgot to mention which group of people were involved, or at whose hands these people died, these civilians. Skalbi and Mkhada which have a majoritively Christian population, were also bombarded with mortars and rockets. As a result, civilians suffered, including women and children. Civilian damage was done to civilian infrastructure, including schools and hospitals. Today, we haven't heard even a word about this, not from our Western colleagues, nor from the representatives of the United Nations. Do they not know about the fact that terrorists are carrying out attacks? We could give another multitude of examples. More detailed information about this is in the bulletins of the Russian Ministry of Defense on de-escalation zone, which is regularly handed out to the members of the Security Council. Despite the provocation and the aggressive incursions from fighters, Russia remains committed to the agreements that it has with Turkey on stabilization in Idlib. Our militaries continue constant contact and coordinate their efforts to end escalation of violence and destabilization. However, Russia and Turkey will not turn a blind eye to the dangerous provocation coming from terrorists who threaten Turkish territory and the Russian airbase at Khmeimim, as well as Syrian military personnel and civilians, and shouldn't try to divide the different parties to the Astana format. As we've heard time and again, implicitly, the Astana format remains one of, if not the only, viable mechanism to help stabilize the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic. We accent once again, the armed forces in Syria and the Russian aerospace forces are exclusively striking terrorist facilities that have been confirmed by intelligence. We have a certain feeling of déjà vu today. Once again, we've heard about the destruction of hospitals, including those that were known, and the coordinators of those hospitals were known. And I've already said earlier in this room, during previous discussions, not only today, but also last year, in Syria, across Syria, before the conflict, there was never such a quantity of hospitals as have been destroyed if you look at the statistics on them. However, it's no secret to anybody that the fighters are making use of civilian infrastructure, hospitals and schools, for military aims, and using people as a human shield. We decisively reject any accusation of indiscriminate strikes. We're not carrying out attacks on civilians. We ask that all of our colleagues, including the UN Secretariat and the specialized agencies of the organization, in their views, use only verified information. We've long had big questions about the sources of the information, including those that are used by different subdivisions of the UN system, including the World Health Organization. I ask you to give this to Mark Lowcock and Rosemary DiCarlo. Please convey this to them. They themselves, in the regions where allegedly strikes, they've never been to these areas where allegedly strikes were made on hospitals. It seems that the majority of this information comes from telephone calls from some kind of reliable sources that have never been checked, and we are not told who these people are. Today, it's been said, much has been said about chemical weapons. I'd like to say that the White Helmets working with Al-Nusra, who some love so much here, are preparing chemical false flag attacks, and we call on the international community to be very serious about the possible new stagings of the use of chemical weapons, which we've warned about time and again. According to current data, HTS, for these aims, has even formed a separate organization. And the information coming from the Syrian government warning about the preparations for terrorist chemical attacks, in essence, are being ignored by international specialized agencies. Mr. President, against the background of the alarmist statements about Idlib, the Security Council should not lose sight of the worrying situation on the eastern bank of the Euphrates, which is not under the control of the Syrian government. In this part of Syria, tension is increasing. The local population is facing demographic engineering. It's being imposed with the support of Western coalition. There's the potential for protest building, which could spill over into armed confrontation. We believe that avoiding a large-scale escalation and establishing a sustainable process of national reconciliation should take place exclusively by ending the illegal international occupation headed by the United States and establishing dialogue with representatives of local ethnic groups and with the Syrian Arab Republic's authorities. We should pay very close attention to the situation in Raqqa, Hajin, Baghuz, in all population centers in the northeast of Syria, which thus far they're destroyed and are not suitable for the civilians to live there. Particular attention should be paid by the Council to the situation in the IDP camp Al-Hol, which is in the province of Haksek, which is on territory not controlled by the Syrian authorities. There's a situation that is close to disaster. The camp is overfull. There are more than 74,000 people living there. Of these, more than 47,000 are minors. The adult population of the camp includes radical fighters. Indeed, they are so radical that even humanitarian personnel are not safe there. Al-Hol has a severe shortage of water and food, medical personnel, medicines, and medical equipment. Infectious illnesses are also spreading. In turn, we continue our work with the coordination of the Syrian authorities on evacuating Syrians from the Rukban IDP camp, which is in the zone of the illegal American occupation. In recent days, the active removal of citizens from territory under the control of the Syrian government has continued despite obstacles created by illegal armed groups that are hiding in this region of Syria. Currently, the camp, thus far, around 14,000 people have left. The situation around Rukban and Al-Hol leads us to a conclusion that there's a certain logic in the Syrian conflict. Indeed, the problem camps for refugees and IDPs are always on territories which are illegally occupied by foreign forces, and that's where we see flagrant violations of human rights. Mr. President, returning to the situation in Idlib, we note that ultimately this province, like other territories of the Syrian Arab Republic, should return to the control of the Syrian government, and the terrorists there have to be undermined, have to be liquidated. There's a need not to allow terrorism to spill over from Idlib into other regions of Syria and further in the region. Fighters in the Syrian Arab Republic have already begun to move to Afghanistan, to Libya, and could certainly also return to their countries of nationality in Europe or Asia. The fighting, the spreading of this threat, is much more important than any artificial stoking of tensions in the region, in the Persian Gulf. Russia will continue its efforts to fight terrorism in Syria and will also establish a sustainable political process in this country with at a national level as a participant of the Astana format and a permanent member of the Security Council. We are ready to cooperate with all constructively minded member states who are genuinely interested in returning peace to Syria. Thank you.
أشكر مندوب الاتحاد الروسي على بيانه وأعطي